there's a lot of coach speak with Jameson Williams. Last year, he averaged over 14 points per game. This is a guy where we know the draft capital, we know the athletic ability, explosive player. Alan, are you in or out on Jameson this year as a guy who could shift fantasy leagues?
Let me kiss you right now, Theo. This is a good take you had right here, and I think I agree with it. And if I, like we do our bold prediction shows, like towards the season, if I'm going to make a bold prediction that I believe has a, at least a 25% chance to come through, I would predict that Jameson Williams has more fantasy points than Amon-Ra St. Brown this year.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Identifying fantasy football sleepers in 2025, specifically breakout players. I'm joined today by Alan Seslowsky of RotoWire, Theo Greminger, Fantasy Football Daily, over here on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network. And Alan, we're always talking about sleepers, and we're always talking about breakouts. And I think a lot of times people love talking about the rookies. But when we identify huge breakouts, guys whose scoring can really go way past where they're being drafted at ADP. Oftentimes it's second-year players, and then sometimes it's been third-year players and even a fourth-year breakout. When we're able to identify this sort of value in our draft, it can really take our teams over the top. So the two of us today are going to talk about one of your favorite subjects in fantasy football, sleepers and breakouts, two of your favorite subjects. So how are you doing today, Alan? What do you have going on?
Yeah, I like this topic because there is a little bit of a trick to this, right? Like it's for me that the strategy of identifying like who that next guy is that's going to be on the cover of the proverbial magazine the next year, Theo, is did they have like a surge of like uptick in production towards the end of the year? Did they finish the last 4 weeks strong? So the overall numbers don't look as good, look as good as that last month. So this is like my specialty. I've been able to do this a few times successfully, like identify the guy. Like I remember the Mark Andrews breakout year, like he was tight end like 11 or 12 in consensus. I was like, there's a case for him to be the overall tight end one. And then it happened with Josh Allen. I think there was 1 year where he was the QB 10 in the consensus rankings. And I looked back at it like a video, and we weren't like convicted on it, but we were talking about him like, this is the player that could actually break fantasy. So I like this conversation because it's going to get my brain thinking about the guys who nobody like loves right now, but could be the guy that makes the difference in fantasy football.
Yeah, and just like people are going to have different definitions of what a breakout candidate is. People are going to have different definitions of what a sleeper candidate is. If you're consuming content at Fantasy Points, you're over here on Fantasy Points YouTube, Fantasy Points Podcast, or on Alan's shows over at RotoWire, it's not like we're going to say a name today that you've never heard of. This is not, 2005 fantasy football where I tell you a player that might be like the handcuff running back that you've never heard of. This is like the information age. Everybody knows everybody. People do best ball, people do dynasty, and now we're into redraft season. But we're going to talk about players specifically who can break through tiers. And when people say, some of these second-year breakouts, I mean, we're not going to talk about guys like Bucky Irving today. We're going to go way, way deeper. We're going to find players that are actual potential values in drafts. And Alan, it's important when we're talking about this year to take a look back at recent memory and just specifically, like last year, Chase Brown is a great example. Year 2 running back, finishes as an RB1. You were able to get him somewhere in the 8th, 9th round in a lot of leagues. He was a massive, massive value. Exactly the kind of player we're looking to unearth. Jackson Smith-Njigba was a player that was not really left for dead, but there was like no buzz last summer. He was the kind of guy where people went in with some apprehension when they clicked the button on him. Is he going to bust? He was a big disappointment as a rookie. And of course, last season finishes as a wide receiver 1. If you want to go up and look at a guy who is being drafted highly and drafters sort of pushed him way up, Drake London was a guy who really had a year 3 breakout, but he doesn't really count. He was being drafted highly. 2023, though, Alan, you're talking about guys who completely broke through. Jordan Love finished as a top 6 scorer at the quarterback position. He was entering his 3rd year as a pro. In a lot of leagues, he was undrafted. He was a waiver wire pickup, even in some formats like FFPC NFFC, and on Underdog, he was like a guy you could draft in round 16, 17, 18. Kyron Williams, waiver wire pickup for many. He was entering year 2, had a massive breakout season. Rachaad White was a guy being drafted pretty aggressively, but not overly aggressively. He was a guy who was being drafted as, say a high-end running back 3 type. He finishes the season as the running back 4 overall. And then how can we forget Trey McBride, your classic example of a guy with draft capital, doesn't do a thing as a rookie, gets an opportunity in year 2, and completely shifted fantasy football leagues in the second half of the season. So there's so many examples of this, and we're going to hope to do it today. Why don't we? You want to start out with the fourth year guys? We'll go dealer's choice here, Alan. We go second or fourth to start out.
Well, just let's not go too fast here first. So the how can we predict this? What's the indicator? I told you already, like look at the last 4 or 5, maybe 6 games of the season, see who popped a little bit, because like Trey McBride, right? Like everybody was high on him and then nobody wanted him because he didn't do a damn thing. What did Trey McBride do in that offseason that we could have maybe predicted this? Like Zach Ertz at the time was C blocking him, right? Like he was in front of him. The same thing happened with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. Now we're looking at Zach Ertz again at age, 35, something like that. And he's blocking Ben Sinnott. So before we get into like the specific guys, what are some of the indicators that, and we're not going to pick up on them all, but what can we look to maybe even get a bunch of players that we're considering as breakouts?
Alan, this is why I love podcasting with you, because you're super sharp and you slow me down. We've podcasted together. Anybody who hasn't necessarily seen Alan over here on the Fantasy Points channel, Alan and I co-hosted the Sonic Truth podcast over Player Profiler together. Alan's come on Dynasty Life a million times, and then I've been on Alan's shows a million times. So we're like, we're talking all the time.
Yeah,
Alan, this is such a good point here.
Well, we talk like this even when we're not doing podcasts. Like we're just trying to like figure out, like, forget the who. It's how can we even like get the sample size together to consider. So go ahead.
So for me, it comes down to, I think the number one is potential opportunity. You look at the team situation. I think number 2, which is really a tie, is talent. And the players cannot be just some bum. I think a lot of times in fantasy football, when we say, oh, this player, because he's on the depth chart, could get this opportunity, and therefore we should draft him, but it's a player that we don't necessarily believe in the talent. I think
like
that's
Rico Dowdle type,
or Zamir White last year. Classic
yes.
example.
Good
I think those sort of guys can get you in trouble. And I think situation matters. I think situation really matters. So it's potential opportunity, talent, and then situation. Situation is different than opportunity. Situation for me is sometimes it's the teammates around them, specifically kind of older guys. If you're surrounded, like you bring up the Trey McBride. Trey McBride had a boxed out situation with a Zach Ertz ahead of him. Zach Ertz gets off to a fast start, then sort of breaks down. You see that in the NFL a lot. You can look at multiple teams with this, and it's
like George Pickens, right? Like the situation last year versus this year. You have to think it's improved, right?
A million %.
And he actually moved down the target tree totem pole this year. He was the 1, now he's the 2 behind CeeDee Lamb, but we like the situation better.
Yeah, 100%. And we're going to talk about Pickens.
Yeah. He's
definitely one of the most interesting ones in year 4. So why don't we just get started? Let's get it going. So you talked about George Pickens. Let's specifically look at Pickens. Pickens entering year 4. This is a player who last year, like you said, if we're going by like fantasy points data, and you're looking at guys with a big target share, a big air yard share, first read rate, Pickens was all there. The problem was it was the target volume in an Arthur Smith offense, and also the quality of the quarterback play. Now both those things are sort of off the window. Dallas on paper looks like a team who wants to pass a ton. They don't have a running back that's a workhorse. And Pickens goes to play with Dak Prescott, the best quarterback he's ever played with. Positive vibes on Dak. Dak looks like really like a guy who's put a lot of work in the gym. Super slim this year.
Dak's
looks like
a good player.
Yeah, Dak's a good player.
Yeah,
Dak's a good player.
He doesn't need it. He has the resume is already logged.
So talk about your thoughts on Pickens, because Pickens is going to be one of the more expensive players we talk about here. Right now in FFPC, $350 drafts, he is going off the board as the wide receiver 30. And if you're drafting on underdog in the best ball streets, he's going, significantly higher than his round 5, 6 turn price tag in FFPC. So your thoughts on Pickens? Is he the sort of player you're looking to target this year?
Yes, but specifically in roster build and team construction, we don't just like talk players, like how you putting together these FFPC rosters, right? And you know what George Pickens reminds me a lot of, Theo? The type of player that Will Fuller was back in the day, right? Like he used to go, he used to go right around wide receiver 30 every year, but he could literally, I'm not just saying this figuratively, he literally put up 40 fantasy point weeks like once or twice a year and tilted you, vaulted you 2-3 places in the standing. So the ideal drafting spot for George Pickens is if you have two, good wide receivers with floors, not just projection guys, and then you just start George Pickens every week in that wide receiver 3 spot. I know in FFPC there's 2, but you have the 2 flex, because with our early wide receivers, what do we want? Like with the Jamar Chases, like if they have 2 or 3 bad weeks, we don't care. We put them in there. But once you start getting into like Jalen Waddle territory, Devontae Smith, if they give you like a 3 for 38 type of week, the second time around, you're like, oh man, do I start him or do I start Jacoby Myers? So Pickens, what's so valuable about him in like the formats that we're talking about is you just put him in your lineup. You take the good with the bad. You're going to win 3 or 4 weeks because of him. It's almost like a best ball mentality, but you just keep starting him through those lean weeks. And the reason that he could be a big breakout is hopefully they're not just going to send him as a clear out pattern guy this year. Like you said, you called attention to Dak as actually a good quarterback. And man, could Pickens really light up fantasy football, especially on those weeks where teams are just like going to take out CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, and if you look at his potential for spike weeks, last year Pickens had 6 games over 16 points scored on a team that the offensive situation was way less appealing than what we're seeing in Dallas this year. So I think I'm with you, and I think from whether you're Dynasty, whether you're best ball, whether you're a redraft manager listening into this, George Pickens is exactly the kind of player we're going to look at, because the price tag is not prohibitive from him really, really breaking out. And Alan, every single year we see a traded wide receiver finish as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. Last year we saw it with Jerry Jeudy. The year before we saw it with DJ Moore. And then multiple years where it was the high end guys, the AJ Browns, the Tyreek Hills, Stephon Diggs, all of those guys were hitting. So we've seen this pretty much every single year. And I'm not saying George Pickens is going to finish as wide receiver 1. I think based on his draft capital, if he finishes wide receiver 20, he's a really, really good pick. But he is the kind of guy that could catch 11 touchdowns in this offense. And like you said, the Will Fuller dynamic, be a spike week guy, be a guy who is the clear number 2 target. CeeDee Lamb in the DeAndre Hopkins role, George Pickens in the Will Fuller role. I love that, Alan.
Yeah, and just one more point here is that this trend that you just spotted from the fantasy points data is really cool, because where this doesn't work out is when the wide receiver gets traded and he's asked to play a role above where he was. So, for example, Corey Davis going back, 8 years ago was the number 2 on Tennessee, and then he gets, moves over to the Jets and is asked to be the number 1. A lot of times when that number 2 is asked to be the number 1 on a trade, that's where things can go wrong. But like when the alpha is like Stephon Diggs and all the other guys you name, that's where this can go well. So actually, George Pickens is being asked to play the vice president role, right? Like he's going from being the president, the alpha, to the 1B. So this is really good for him. So I like the setup, and I like that call out of a trend.
Back-to-back seasons where he's finished as the wide receiver 35 and wide receiver 36 in points per game. I'm going to be shocked if he doesn't beat those numbers in Dallas this year. Alan, before we continue, let everybody know what you have going on over at RotoWire. Got some really amazing guests lined up for the end of June here, huh?
Yeah, over on the Theo's coming on the podcast. Spoiler alert.
There you go.
So what we're doing over there at RotoWire YouTube page, we have the Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. If you go over there and you see some fantasy baseball content, don't be deterred. We change over the page from baseball to football July 1st. So also, we have a bunch of new tools and everything. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you want to see behind RotoWire's paywall, right now we have a special for your listeners, YouTube 15. Go to rotowire.com, put in the code YouTube 15, 15% off. That's it.
Yeah, highly recommend all of Alan's content. I listen to it often. It's a great show you're doing over the Dynasty. Big shout out, Jim Coventry came on Fantasy Football Daily with me before people really love that show. So Alan,
Cool.
let's keep this going. I just had Andrew Erickson on, and anybody who wants to hear my thoughts on Jameson Williams, I talked about, made some really, really big predictions for him, as did Andrew. There's a lot of bullish people. I went over with the Ship Chasers recently, Pete Overzet, Davis Maddock. They're all enthusiastic about Jameson Williams. Jameson took a step forward last year, and then this past offseason, this is a guy that Detroit did not move. Apparently, there was some big trade offers for him. They decided to keep him. And the new offensive coordinator, John Morton, has said that this is going to be his breakout season. Sky's the limit sort of deal. Like, there's a lot of coach speak with Jameson Williams. Last year, he averaged over 14 points per game. This is a guy where we know the draft capital, we know the athletic ability, explosive player. Alan, are you in or out on Jameson this year as a guy who could shift fantasy leagues? And he's wide receiver 28, so slightly ahead of George Pickens.
Let me kiss you right now, Theo. This is a good take you had right here. And I think I agree with it. And if I, like we do our bold prediction shows, like towards the season, if I'm going to make a bold prediction that I believe has a, at least a 25% chance to come through, I would predict that Jameson Williams has more fantasy points than Amon-Ra St. Brown this year, right? And reason is they're going to throw, they've already said they're going to throw more downfield, like the over the middle throw. That's going to still be part of it with Jahmyr Gibbs, with Sam Laporta, and of course with Amon-Ra. But they realize this new regime, they've had a lot of success, but to get to the next level, they've already said we're throwing downfield, and guess who that's going to be? Jameson Williams. So I would say when you talk about touchdowns, dynamism, run plays, that JMO at this price, he probably should be a third or fourth round pick, but that's not going to happen, right? Because until it actually happens, the super breakout, people aren't willing to pay for it. So hot take is that JMO overtakes Amon-Ra as the most fantasy points getter. So I am with you on this one, 1,000,000% as a breakout.
Yeah, I hope that Jameson Williams doesn't get me in trouble. I've had 2 dynasty startups. I've drafted him in both, Alan, and I want a lot of access to him. I think I completely agree with you. This is officially a Jameson Williams podcast, I guess, for the rest of the summer. So we'll keep it going. Let's talk about a player that's getting a lot less juice, a lot less steam than Pickens or Jameson Williams, and that's Khalil Shakir.
Yeah,
and this is a player that Khalil Shakir, okay, we're just to give it a quick context. He was a guy that was a day 3 pick, did literally nothing as a rookie. He had 20 targets. He averaged 2 points a game. Then year 2 takes his game to another level, averages 7 points per game. And it's sort of dismissed there. Obviously, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, a lot of different faces in Buffalo in 2023. Then last year in 2024, takes advantage of sort of a open wide receiver room and has his best season as a pro, a classic year 3 breakout, averaged 12.2 points per game. So he's inside of wide receiver 3 land. And he had 100 targets. And what's really interesting about Khalil Shakir is he had the second most yards after the catch in football. This is a player who really, really cooks with the ball in his hands, manufactured touch guy, potentially plays the slot. Your thoughts on Khalil Shakir taking his game to another level this year? They gave him a big contract, Alan.
Yeah, I think that this one is going to disappoint people. And again, you have to make your bet on which Buffalo Bill pass catcher is going to be the breakout. And by the way, nobody knows, and that's why they're all pretty cheap. Usually the number 1 quarterback in the league, Josh Allen, his number 1 pass catcher would be pushed up to a second round pick. Look at the Joe Burrow pass catchers. Chase goes 1 overall. T. Higgins goes on the 2-3 turns, for a decent amount of drafts. Meanwhile, Khalil Shakir, what does he go, Theo? Round 6?
Yeah, he's like wide receiver. So in the underdog
35,
market,
right?
Yeah, underdog market, he's pushed up in FFPC and a couple other formats. He's wide receiver 43. I think that the reason that he gets pushed up in underdog is also probably the most appealing reason you're taking him on an underdog is it's Josh Allen, and I have a chance to get the guy who's going to lead Buffalo in targets, even if he's not a great redraft pick, with the potential for correlation and stacking. It's the best ball effect with Khalil Shakir for the underdog, his ADP. But I'll say, I'm agree with you where I'm kind of unenthusiastic. I think that last year he was a fun one. If you drafted him last year, he beat his ADP. Now I sort of have to pay for it. There's just other guys around him. And they added Josh Palmer. We're going to talk about Keon Coleman a little bit later. Dalton Kincaid is healthy this year. It just feels to me like Khalil Shakir is a guy who averaged 12 points a game last year. and probably averages 12 points a game this year. He's a really valuable role player for them because of his slot usage, his yak ability, but I don't know if he has a profile that's going to take his game to the next level. So I'd say like we're both sort of like whatever on Khalil Shakir.
Yeah, well, he's going to be a par, right? Like you're going to probably take him in the 6th or 7th or 8th round, depending on the format. Like you said, push up, wide receivers, not, and you're going to get that production back. You're going to be, it's going to be someone that you're never going to drop the entire year. He'll give you your 6 for 60, and then the weeks he gets a touchdown, you're going to be pumped you have him. So breakout, I don't know. Like when I hear breakout, I'm thinking like, who are the guys that are going to get, we do our mid-season draft sometimes, like we started drafting like week 4 or 5. And, if Shakir is going in round 7, does he get pushed up to round 3 by a month into the season? It's hard to see that, especially though. I'm coloring a little bias because I am seeing the world through Keon Coleman glasses right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. We'll talk about Coleman in a little bit. Let's pivot over to the running back position. Let's talk about Brian Robinson. And this is one where it's always just so boring. I've had a bunch of people talk to me about Brian Robinson this offseason, and I think it's a good argument for him where he survives the offseason. Washington doesn't add a back in the draft until round 7 with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. They made significant additions to their offensive line, drafted a lineman in round 1, of course, trade for Laramie Tunsil. So they improved that unit. And this is a Jaden Daniels-led offense where you're going to have a quarterback who's going to finish top 2 in rushing yardage this year in the NFL, maybe 3rd if Fields and Jackson average more, but he'll be close to the top in rushing production, so sort of opens up lanes for running backs. And Robinson's been okay. 2023, scored a bunch of touchdowns and actually caught a number of passes, averaged 13.2 points per game. Last year averages 11.4 points per game. So he's kind of right on that line. 17 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons and hasn't really pushed his scoring up. But Washington right now has a win total of like 9.5 in Vegas. And Jacob Gibbs came on a pod with Scott and I, made a point that Vegas is projecting Washington to be like a top 4 scoring team. They're not always right, but they get it right a lot. So are we chasing the Washington offense by taking Brian Robinson? He's pretty affordable right now, Alan, but I just don't find myself that excited about him, even at running back 30.
Yeah, you know who he reminds me of? Like Najee Harris, right? Like where we are on him. It's just like, okay, he's not 28 yet. He's 26. He's on a good offense, and sure, I'll take him when he's there. I mean, Brian Robinson is the guy that's probably going to need a lot of touchdowns. If Washington really is like this super powered offense with Jaden Daniels, I remember like 15 years ago, 12 years ago when it was RG3 and Alfred Morris. No one thought Alfred Morris was great, but he got a lot of running room with RG3 there. Now Jaden Daniels kind of is that RG3 dynamic back. So it's easy to see Brian Robinson. Now, a lot of these, deep dive sleeper sickos like Chris Rodriguez. So he's back on the team as so if you don't want to waste a pick on, or use a pick, I should say, on Brian Robinson, Rodriguez is an interesting, you can't fit him on a typical roster. He's certainly easy to see like Brian Robinson's missing week 6, push all your money in for Rodriguez. So he is in similar size, like he's a big back. And I don't think anyone thinks Austin Eckler is in his peak anymore, right? Like he's way past that. So I am not predicting Brian Robinson breakout, but he'll be a useful every week starter. And should be able to get yours with him. So, I mean, as a breakout, no, but it's an interesting pick given the very modest price on him.
Yeah, for me, he's structural. I'm doing a sort of a zero and hero RB targets article at Fantasy Points, and I wrote about Brian Robinson at cost, because if I get stuck, and let's say I do hero RB build and I wait on my RB2, I can get by at the beginning of the season with Brian Robinson. And zero RB, it's the same thing. If I need like that guy to average somewhere in that Brian Robinson line of 11 to 13 points per game, I think he'll hit it. But we're chasing upside here. So I agree. It's hard to make a huge argument.
Would you rather have Brian Robinson? Let's say like you've built a team where Robinson's your second running back, right? Would you rather have like him or Aaron Jones as your second running back in redraft?
So I think in redraft, Jones is going a little bit ahead. I think that, but that's exactly it. Like it's sort of I can get that Aaron Jones, Caleb Johnson, DeAndre Swift tier like at a round earlier. And I think it's just a better bet for one of those guys to really give me return on value than Robinson, who seems like a very structural pick. I think Robinson's just going side by side with guys like Jalen.
But I'm saying you only get to pick one. That's why I asked you, because the next tier up, right. So, okay, so you take Jones, right? Because he is ranked a full round ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you pass on that tier, if you pass on that like DeAndre Swift, Pollard, Aaron Jones tier, then you are forced almost to take like a Tyrone trade. You get into the boring tier, the Robinson, Javonte Williams. Like, isn't it funny? They're all grouped together. Those guys that are just like we used to call it the dead zone. They'd be 5th round picks. Now they're 8th round picks.
Yeah, that's a great subject and something I've been trying to dive into. Where does the dead zone start? I think it sort of like starts with Joe Mixon this year and keeps going. But those
you don't
guys
like Mixon? You don't like him?
I don't know. I'm worried about him being banged up and then bringing Nick Chubb in, and then Woody Marks taking away some. I just think Mixon's sort of your classic dead zone back. Scored a lot last year. I mean, I've drafted him, but Chubb
is the exact, again, I don't want to get off topic, but Chubb is the exact type of guy though that you want if you're Joe Mixon behind him, right? Like, he may not even, he may not make the team. He can't play special teams. Damian Pierce can. Woody Marks, obviously they just drafted him. He's going to make the team. So I would say Chubb is a 50-50 bet to not even make the roster.
I love it, Alan. The nostalgia potential handcuff name gives you a little bit of a discount on Mixon. I like the argument. I just worry a little bit. I think they'll be a little more pass happy. But Alan, year 3, this is a lot more fun because, year 4, some of these guys, we talk about Williams, talk about Pickens, you sort of already know them. When some of the players we're going to talk about for year 3, there's a little bit more chance for their profiles for them to run a little bit here. Let's talk about it from the start. I'll ask you about 2 tight ends, Tucker Kraft or Dalton Kincaid. One was a round 3 pick in 2023. One was a round 1 pick in 2023. They're both on teams that we think are going to be in the playoffs. Which one is a better bet to have a impactful fantasy football season in 2025?
I mean, if I, God forbid, answered this question, Dalton Kincaid, people would be punching their radios right now, right? And slamming it down the floor. I don't know anybody, Theo. I don't know one single person that likes Dalton Kincaid this year. I think I did a 16-round draft and he wasn't even drafted. Like, people were taking upside shots. So the answer is obviously Tucker Kraft. And especially you heard how Jordan Love's been talking about him, saying this guy has to be a focal piece of the offense. Come on, man. You gave me such a layup question here. I mean, you have to agree here. Dalton Kincaid is quasi undraftable in like a typical 10 or 12 team league 16-round draft.
Yeah, I mean, there's when it comes to Kincaid, I don't want to say like never say never, because we do have some positivity that we saw for him his rookie season. And Dalton Kincaid rookie year, like, he was steamed up a little bit, Alan, where he was not a guy that was like a low draft pick. Of course, he was a first round pick.
Yeah, of course there was optimism. Yeah,
there was optimism, but the guy had 73 catches as a rookie. So, like, he's a guy who's already shown that. Last year took a significant step backwards, but apparently was playing banged up. There's been some positive speak where Kincaid, worked on his health this offseason. I'm searching for reasons to like Dalton Kincaid this year. For me, I think we talked about Shakir. It's sort of like it's just an ambiguous like target tree in Buffalo. Might as well take a cheaper one. And Kincaid is not like overly cheap at the tight end position, but I'm with you. It's Tucker Kraft. I've talked about like a number of smart people on Tucker Kraft, including yourself. Kraft, like, when we're looking at tight ends, we want to find players who are going to finish as the number 1 or number 2 target on their teams. That sort of fantasy football cheat code. And Alan, with the uncertainty of the wide receivers in Green Bay, where one of them is not just running away with a massive target share, like Tucker Kraft, there's enough there where you have positivity with Matt LaFleur, positivity with Jordan Love, and last year he took a big step forward. For him to take an even bigger step forward this year, I've had some people say that he's sort of the dark horse to be like a top 5 scorer at the tight end position.
Yeah, and by the way, it makes me uncomfortable when you call me smart. I think because everyone listening to your podcast here, like, they know just as much as any podcaster. They, like, at this point, like, people that are into the fantasy points data suite and all that stuff, like, The only thing they can't do is a podcast. They probably can do it. They're just as smart. So I reject the smart label because it's all relative to the audience. And the audience, you have a very sophisticated audience. We have a bunch of dopes over at RotoWire, so it's a little different. Just kidding. We love the RotoWire audience. But yeah, no, back to the subject at hand. Kincaid is interesting pick there but it just, it's one of those things I want to see it first. And when I see it, it's probably going to be too late as a late round option. That's fine. But what are you going to do if Kincaid gives you 2 bad weeks in a row? You're going to be already forced to drop him, and you don't want to drop. Was he going like in the 10th round? I'm assuming something like that, 11th round, 12th round.
Yeah. So like from the specific context of rounds, I'll say that we're some audience members might be tight end premium. Some might be PPR, but I'll say like just in the tight end hierarchy, Kraft is tight end 12 and Kincaid
13.
Is tight end 13.
Okay, so Kincaid for me would be tight end like 12. Like I'd rather have Zach Ertz. I'd rather have Hunter Henry in redraft.
Then you're fading him in every single draft. And then
yes.
On the flip side, I'll just give you a head-to-head ADP debate here. Let me pull up another one. So Tucker Kraft, you said you're enthusiastic about. I'll say Tucker Kraft or Tyler Warren. Which one would you rather have on your roster?
Yeah, I don't draft rookie tight ends with any expectations there. So those guys, Warren and Colston love it. And by the way, Warren has a chance, right? It's so easy to see like him having a chance. So I'm ready to be wrong here, but I'm going to always fade the rookie at the tight end position and I would be wrong with Brock Bowers, right? I would have been wrong with Sam Laporta, but I didn't say I was going to get it right 100% of the time. I'm saying like this is my 60% process, and I just made that number up. So yeah, I'm going to take Kraft. I already like what I saw. I like how Jordan Love specifically identified him as a player that needs to be involved in the offense to make it better than last year.
So we talk about fringe tight end ones in Kraft and Kincaid. Let's talk about a sort of lower end tight end 2 that a lot of people are circling as a dark horse at the tight end position. There's been a lot of positivity with Brenton Strange. And Alan, when we talk about breakouts, we talk about sleepers. Strange checks off a lot of boxes because there's a lack of tight end competition in Jacksonville. There's a lack of like a wide receiver 3. Travis Hunter, Brian Thomas, we think they're very, very talented. But Strange seems like a guy that could get enough targets that he could be viable. And he has second round NFL draft capital. This is a guy that was highly drafted. Where are you at on Strange? Because we do see these sort of range players potentially break through at the tight end position. Tight end's been a place where we've been able to find sleepers over the years. Are you in or out on Strange? And you're what do you even call somebody from Jacksonvilleonian? A Jacksonville?
A Jacksonite.
Jacksonite.
Yeah, no, I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I'm currently living in Jacksonville. That's how even my social media profile. I like to still claim New York as my home, but yes, Florida, we love it here. Do you see a lot of similarities? I mean, I'm probably asking an obvious question here between last year's Tampa Bay Buccaneers team and this year's Jacksonville team. Head coach, the 2 elite receivers, the distressed number 1 overall quarterback. So, and then obviously Travis Etienne to Rashad White, Bucky Irving to Bashal Tutin potentially, and Tank Bigsby to Sean Tucker. Like there's a lot of like setup similarities. So I think that if you follow that logic and subscribe to it, isn't Brenton Strange Kate Otten, right? And that's not bad, right? Price is about the same as it was last year. You could start him if he gets hot. So yeah, man, if you're in a league where you're waiting, I like taking an upside shot here, but the problem is, like with all these tight ends in that range, is that if it starts poorly, you're going to have some real drop decisions. But I like Strange as an upside pick if you're just like rolling if you're in best ball season right now. I mean, it's an easy pick, but once we get into like set our lineups FFPC style, I like Strange as having like a Kate Otten-esque type of season who really flourishes if, God forbid, there's a primary pass catcher injury.
What's interesting with Trevor Lawrence, if we look at tendencies, a lot of people will say this is the stupidest thing Theo said in a while, but he had a tendency to hyper target his tight end.
Ooh.
Was that an Evan Ingram? Like Evan Ingram is our slot receiver. Evan Ingram is more of like a move tight end and sort of an overgrown wide receiver, or is it a Trevor Lawrence stat? I think the smart money is that this is an Evan Ingram stat. But I'll just say, like with Dak Prescott, when we see these quarterbacks who are a little bit younger get in habits, Kyler Murray for that matter is a tight end, a guy who targets tight ends. Like, is that a static thing here? I'll say with Strange, for him to hit his upside outcome, it's going to take an injury to Thomas or Hunter.
That's what I said. Yeah. Like same thing with Kate Otten last year. Remember he
Yeah.
went on like a 1 month heater when Godwin was out and then when Mike Evans missed some time. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities there. He's probably not a player I'm drafting, but if I am a little bit, unsure about the tight end position, he is a player that I'm certain will be dropped in the first 3 weeks of the season. And then, like you said, when the opportunity arises there, I believe in Strange. Like he had I think he had like a 12 catch. He had a 12 target, 11 catch for 73-yard game against the Jets in week 15. Like the upside is there. He can grasp the ball, bring it in, and score you some fantasy points.
So I'd say one of the trending players on like X, a lot of smart people on him, including Scott Barrett. Scott Barrett has said that Josh Downs is a player he wants to trade for in every single Dynasty league. Now, year 3 wide receiver breakouts. We've seen it where a player ends up like really taking his scoring to a high level. We talked about Jameson Williams last year. A couple years ago, this is Nico Collins was sort of the year 3 guy. With Downs, it's not a breakout in the classic sense because last year averaged 13.1 points per game. He had 107 targets and 114 games played, and the metrics were there. As a rookie, he had 771 receiving yards and 68 receptions. I believe those are all-time records for the Indianapolis Colts. So this is not a guy who is like out of nowhere. Thank you for teaching me about Josh Downs. So I'll ask you this, Alan, but he's so red hot right now. Everyone's enthusiastic about Josh Downs. I would be shocked if his ADP doesn't start creeping up throughout the summer. Daniel Jones taking over. Most likely it's Daniel Jones. And we expect the offense to be way more pass happy and to have a lot more accuracy. Anthony Richardson really struggled with his accuracy as a passer. Daniel Jones is by no means perfect, but it's going to be a little bit more functional offense in several ways here, especially for the pass catchers. Are you in or out on Josh Downs now that everybody is sort of pushing the chips in on him?
Yeah, you made a lot of good points here. So the only thing that I could really add to this is like, what are we getting when we draft Josh Downs? Or it's like, for me, it's like, I see him how we used to view Tyler Lockett in his like age 25 to 28 season, where there's going to be these really good weeks. Again, you could start him where you want. He is, like I said, a trending player up, but this is really going to be a quarterback dependent question. And of course, we want Daniel Jones to be the quarterback here, but you have to figure, I don't think anyone's projecting the Colts to be a good team, Theo. So down the stretch, if they are not in a good spot, they're going to want to get a good look at Anthony Richardson. So I think that Anthony Richardson, even if he doesn't start the season, we're looking at 7 game starts. And if he can't stay healthy, you're looking at that with their late round pick, Riley Leonard, who supposedly can't throw the football at all. He's more of a running quarterback. So I think Josh Downs has proven to be as quarterback proof as possible. So I mean, I'm not going to like him as much as, like you said, Scott Barrett is and like push people out of the way to get him. But sure, he's a good pick in fantasy football. Well, you know why? Because you said in the beginning of the podcast, I want good, talented players. And Josh Downs at age 23, man, he certainly is that.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how high his ADP steams up because you have so many people saying draft Josh Downs, trade for Josh Downs, but he's still
which means
really
you can't, by the way, which means you can't.
In Dynasty, I agree with you, but
yeah.
In like best ball and in redraft, we haven't seen like this huge ADP correction yet. So you're still able to get him as like a very low end wide receiver 3, sometimes a wide receiver 4. And I think like if he's at that price, I'll draft him all the time. But if he becomes the riser and really, really steams up throughout the summer, then it becomes sort of a, like you said, is he a capped upside player? And we bring up Tyler Warren before. I'll say with Daniel Jones, does Michael Pittman, does Tyler Warren, do those kind of guys sap enough targets off of Downs where Downs in like the slot role, it sort of limits his ceiling to have multiple pass catchers around him? And that's not even including Alec Pierce, who is the big play guy, and Adonai Mitchell, who on paper should be a big play guy this year, a guy who scores very highly on like average separation score, was a hyper like athletic guy and was a round 2 pick. So like there's just a lot of people around him in Indianapolis too. So I'll say I'm in on Downs at his current price for sure.
Pick 100, like an FFPC, something like that?
I'm 100% in on that price.
Yeah. but he's already kind of broken out, right? But the price is fair because it's so. Remember with Tyler again? I brought up the name Tyler Lockett. Like Tyler Lockett was a perennial, like, oh my god, he was a 3rd round pick, 4th round pick, 5th round pick. That's where if we're, you know what? So it is kind of a breakout because next year it is so easy to see Downs being in that 3rd to 5th round if he really does have one of those monster seasons. I mean, I was going to bring up like his 170-pound frame size, but he's already, pushed that narrative. He's just good at football.
Yeah, and he was a big-time producer in college as well. Yeah. And I'll say with Downs, people saying, Theo and Allen, like, chill on the Downs, breaking out, like he's broken out. We're saying a guy who can give you a top 15 production for the first time ever in his career. And I think with Downs, it's in the range of outcomes.
There's levels to this thing, man.
There's levels.
This thing. Yeah, I mean, he's already had his breakout where like he's getting drafted in the top 100. There's another breakout where he becomes like, a top 15 overall wide receiver in fantasy football.
Yeah, there you go. I'm with you. So I'll say Downs, just be careful of the steam. But if you're drafting it, like I'd say up until 4th of July, when people sort of come out of the woodwork and there's going to be more volume, potential to move them up. From now until then, draft away. Just keep an eye on him rising up like 2 rounds. Then it becomes a more interesting sort of conversation to have with yourself. Let's talk about year 3 running backs.
We're up on Downs.
There you go. Year 3 running backs, and an interesting one. I just dropped my handcuff matrix and backfield breakdown article and fantasy points, and one of the more valuable handcuffs to roster in fantasy football is Zach Charbonnet. He was a 2nd round pick a few years ago. Kenneth Walker misses time each and every year. Charbonnet last year had 3 weeks where he finished as a top 8 scorer at the position. Seattle this year gets Clint Kubiak, who was really successful with what he did in New Orleans last year. A lot of enthusiasm for them to be way more efficient as a running team this year. Like, people think about the scoring from Walker and Charbonnet, but Seattle was like bottom 8 in rushing yards per game for the last 2 seasons. That looks like it's going to trend up. So Charbonnet, again, Ken Walker in front of him, but he's been very, very impactful. Are you in or out on Charbonnet as a guy who could potentially be a league winner if Walker misses an extended period of time? And I'll say this, Charbonnet is going off the board like pretty aggressively. He's like a round 9 pick on Underdog and also on in FFPC drafts, being drafted as every single draft as a running back 3.
Has the team, because this is a whole new coaching regime over the last couple of years, like have they declared that Ken Walker's their workhorse back and that Zach Charbonnet's
all the coach,
go ahead.
The coach speak is always Walker. It's never Charbonnet. I think like if they have a love and infatuation for Charbonnet as a player, they keep it more grounded and sort of not as open. Like it's always sort of anytime it's been a Mike McDonald, it's been Mike McDonald talking about Ken Walker. Right. Last year when Grubb was the offensive coordinator, they talked about Ken Walker, and then they used the hell out of Ken Walker last year. And I just think it's like, it's Walker can't stay on the field. And I've been drafting the hell out of Walker, but Walker's a guy who misses time every single year, which makes Charbonnet appealing to me. And Alan, when it comes to Walker, we've seen him miss like 3 games, 4 games, but what if that turns into 8 or 9? Then that's the appeal for Charbonnet.
Yeah, and the price on Walker isn't bad either. It's like the 4 or 5 turn type of thing.
Yeah, you can argue for drafting Walker and Charbonnet, not in the same team necessarily, because they're again, it's a big bet on Charbonnet. But I think walking out of your drafts with either Walker or Charbonnet, like you're going to end up with a guy who's putting up big numbers one way or another. It's probably more likely Walker, but again, Walker, you're paying that 5th round price tag, 4th round price tag. And Charbonnet, I'm able to get him round 10 and around 9.
Yeah, Walker, if he didn't miss all those games, he'd probably be going in like in the early 3rd round, like the Chase Browns and all that. So, yeah, I mean, it's like you have to make a bet on one or the other, right? I mean, I know people that aggressively handcuff. What was remember years ago when Arian Foster, the Houston running back, that was like this elite. There was what was the dude's name? People were taking him like in the 5th round as a handcuff. Ben something. Do you remember that dude?
Oh yeah. This was the name's not ringing a bell, but
this is what it reminds me of, right? Like where the
Ben
primary
Tate.
yeah,
I was about to put that thing in on the old Google, and then the memory popped in my mind. Ben Tate, super athletic.
Is that this reminds me of taking the handcuff 5 rounds later than the primary back. People are making bets on one or the other. I still like Walker, so I haven't taken Charbonnet, but I see the case for Charbonnet getting a 30% of the work there, and especially since we saw him as the primary back already be like league winner, week winner for fantasy football. So I'm in if I need to pick in or out, but I haven't drafted him yet. So I guess, my 50, 60 best balls I've done. And by the way, do you remember when 50, 60 best balls used to be a lot? People laugh at me now. I used to be like, oh my God, you did 50. Now it's like they do like 150 by this time. It's crazy.
While we're recording this, I'm OTC in 3 slow best ball drafts that just popped up on my phone. So yeah.
How many are you going to do by the end of the year? How many best balls will you have logged?
As many as I can cram in when it comes to underdog and FFPC. I'm a slow drafter for best balls because, I don't want it to get in the way of life. So it's like a lifestyle choice for me, but I'll give you best ball. I agree. There's like no number that you can flex, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, look at this high volume guy," because everybody's high volume.
Right, but I'm saying 5 years ago, I was almost embarrassed to tell people I did. They're like, "Oh, you're wasting your money." I'm like, "No, I enjoy it. It's something I draft every day." And when I forgot about that mindset, the best ball hashtag best ball bro. Everyone's live streaming them now, and I love it, by the way. But when I said them on the podcast, like. One of the newer guys that's doing a lot of streaming, Theo, he chuckled. I said, "Oh, do you think?" And he goes, "No, dude." He goes, "That's nothing." Because I did 60 like last week or some shit. Like, it was crazy,
Exactly. Yeah, the best ball sort of changed everything.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up these guys for year 3, and I'll give it to you for like a 30-second response on this one because he's way low. Roschon Johnson has been a player that for a few years there's been people enthusiastic about him. Was a 4th round pick. Last year, it was a weird profile. He had 6 touchdowns, but he sort of became that like goal line or nothing guy. 2.7 yards per carry. Does he see like a life raft with Ben Johnson there, or is this just a wasted pick? He is what he is.
I think that the easy comparison is like look at some other Ben Johnson setups where they had like a Roschon Johnson type, and that's the David Montgomery, right? Like, and then also you could almost see the setup where Jamal Williams was there, right? Now, Jamal Williams scored, 20-something touchdowns in that role. And the encouraging thing is that the Bears didn't really add anybody besides a 7th round running back. They didn't add any of these, free agents types, Cam Akers, even if you go down that list, it's signed with New Orleans. So there's really nobody out there right now that I can think of that would disrupt what they have. So I think that you have to bet on the optimistic side of Roschon Johnson, which, by the way, like, he's primed for a breakout in a sense where like not this dynamic guy, but if they get on the goal line, you could see Roschon Johnson having 9 touchdowns. I mean, his under over is probably 5.5, just because that's like the sane bet. But yeah, I like the Ben Johnson narrative, bringing that his setup to Chicago, and that puts him somewhere between David Montgomery and Jamal Williams, right? At some point.
Yeah, I mean, it would be the bet. I mean, I think that like Kyle Monangai, the rookie, has a little buzz. If Roschon sort of is meh, then I think Monangai could get an opportunity. But right now, Roschon as like an end game target, not the worst one. Asking about one more running back, and then we're going to rapid fire guys that are entering year 2. Tank Bigsby is now the 3rd running back off the board for the Jaguars in drafts. Last year, he was easily the most efficient runner in Jacksonville. Ended the year with 766 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. Had a couple of really big games, though, Alan. And when we talk about Bigsby, again, he had a 23-point game in week 7, had a 26-point game in week 5. So had some high-scoring outputs. And both those games, he rushed for like over 120 yards. But when it comes to Bigsby, is he a guy that we're taking advantage of an ambiguous backfield by drafting the 3rd highest drafted player? Or would you sort of prefer taking a shot on ETN or Tootin in this situation?
I think the next time that we talk about Tank Bigsby will be on a waiver wire show, right? Like, yeah, I don't think that he's probably, in the NFFC, FFPC stuff where you just have to draft like the super deep benches. Sure, you want to get like what you call the ambiguous backfields where we don't 100% know the pecking order at this point. That's a good bet. But for anyone just like playing in like a regular 15, 16 round home league, there's not going to be room to draft him. And if you do, you're not going to, he could be inactive week 1 for all we know. So we will mention his name again if Travis Etienne gets hurt, if Bashal Tutin really falls into the doghouse and has some training camp woes. But I don't think Bigsby, and I all the things you said about him, true, but he might be like the week 7, number 1 obvious waiver wire pickup. That's how I'm viewing him heading into draft season.
Because we got to talk about these year 2 guys. Let's start off with the player that is very, very polarizing in the community these days, and that's Rome Odunze. Odunze was going off the board as like the wide receiver 24 on Underdog before the NFL draft. I think people were really, really excited about him. Now he's fallen. Right now on Underdog and on
Why is he falling? Why is he falling?
He's just like it's a reaction to Colston Loveland and Luther Burden being drafted within the first 40 picks of the NFL draft.
But isn't the talk been negative on Burden? Like people are already trying to unload him.
A little bit banged up with Burden. I think Burden hasn't really been on the field as much. I think when it comes to Burden, like the speak from Ben Johnson was Ben Johnson used the words he's a stud, and like I mean, that matters a lot. I know
this is all this coach stuff drives the market, whether it's true or not. It doesn't even matter. It's like it's the same thing with like cryptocurrency and stocks, right? Like the narratives and the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt, the FUD is what drives the prices on these guys. I thought that the things were positive for Rome Odunze. That's why I'm shocked that you said it's falling.
Yeah, it's interesting because like Loveland and Burden have both missed time. Again, it's early on the summer. This isn't training camp, but younger players taking that huge step forward. You love to see them on the field consistently. And Odunze still has slipped, though, Alan. Like, when you're talking about a player who's dropped about 12 spots in the wide receiver rankings, it comes down to wide receiver 36 for Odunze, which isn't low, but it isn't high when you were talking about a guy who was a top 10 pick last year. Of course, the scoring was really low last year. The situation was really bad. There was coaches fired in the year. Caleb Williams sort of underperformed. Where are you at on like your enthusiasm for Odunze at like wide receiver 36? Do you think this is a great entry point for you, or do you have the sort of apprehension? And I'll just give you a quick, before you answer this, he's going alongside guys like Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Jordan Addison, Jawan Jennings, in that sort of range of the draft.
Yeah, the one player that you poked at there was Waddle. Is that I think Waddle's the best value. We're talking Odunze, but Waddle to me is the best value in all of fantasy drafts right now. For another, yeah, he was a 2nd round pick last year. There's a lot of different reasons, and we can get into another time. But I like the Odunze play because I like that Ben Johnson, the head coach, has been talking him up, saying like he's ready for a breakout, more or less. I'm paraphrasing there. And then also he's called out Luther Burden for, quote, being behind because of the injury stuff. And then we already had a conversation, you and I, about Colston Loveland and rookie tight ends. It's a good bet to bet against those guys, especially early in the season. So you have DJ Moore there. You have the upgraded offense. Odunze, I mean, it's when you talk about breakouts, he should be on the cover of the YouTube thumbnail. He should be on the cover of the magazine. Do you remember going back a bunch of years ago before Chris Godwin broke out on Tampa Bay that there was like signs of a breakout coming, but it was Mike Evans. And that was the year Chris Godwin finished as like wide receiver 2 overall. I think that Rome Odunze in this offense, if Ben Johnson can reproduce what he did in Detroit, he's got the chance to be a top 5 wide receiver. And we're like, oh my God, I got him in round, it's round 7 or whatever it is. And he's, we're a month in and we're in September and he's wide receiver 3 on the year. He was a top 10 pick in the real NFL draft. Everyone liked him. Had a disappointing season relative to where he was drafted. And now it's all set up in it. You said in the top of the podcast, one of your breakout indicators is what's the setup? The setup is right there. I know it seems, quote, crowded, but for 2025, where Burden is a little behind already, he's got a rookie. And then DJ Moore already, had a down season. Not saying DJ Moore is going to be bad or anything, but man, Rome Odunze is a player that I'm like pushing people out of the way. I'm proactively drafting him.
Yeah, it's interesting, Alan, because I think at wide receiver 24, it would have been way too high for me to draft him. But it's the more people sort of beat up the profile, the more it makes me want to take a couple of shots here.
Oh, yeah.
Just as a sort of a range of outcomes thing. And if Burden does miss time, then I think that the threat of Odunze not playing inside in the slot, like, sort of goes away. And I think Ben Johnson might move guys around and move different players in the slot. But Odunze had the highest slot rate besides Keenan Allen last year among the wide receivers. So, like, he's got it in the profile to be sort of a big slot. We had Matt Harmon on this show. Matt Harmon was very, very optimistic about Odunze. So I'll say, like, I'm sort of neutral. I like hearing you be bullish on him, though.
Yeah.
Let's keep it going. One player who you're really enthusiastic about, who's sort of a little bit of a post-hype sleeper here, Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman last year, people were a lot more enthusiastic about than this year. We talked about the crowded situation in Buffalo among targets, but Coleman has become a really cheap player to get, was a top 40 pick, big, young wide receiver, big-time production at Florida State.
Oh, man, Keon Coleman was about to have a mega breakout when he got hurt last year. In week 6 and 7 last year, Theo, and what he have together, he had one game, he had 125 yards. The next game, he had 70 and a touchdown. And then he gets hurt, and he said he just never felt the same after that. So, we talked about the top of the podcast. Like, we need to, like, if we see it and then something happens to disguise it, that's a breakout indicator. Keon Coleman, man, he has the profile to really break fantasy football. It is so easy to see him emerge as Josh Allen's number one target. And now we're taking him at like pick 11 next year, or pick like 14 next year. I know it's hard to envision it right now because he didn't have that break fantasy rookie year, but in those, go back and watch highlights. You don't even need to watch film. Watch the YouTube highlights. I know that's like a dirty word in fantasy football analysis, but go back and watch those two games and tell me if you didn't see a player that was basically an alpha wide receiver and playing with the best quarterback in the NFL, not named Patrick Mahomes. So Keon Coleman, he is a true breakout. And again, I would take him ahead of Shakir. You don't have to, but it's so easy to see him being like a top 20 pick in fantasy football next year.
Yeah, Keon Coleman, for me, this is a really easy one to click because he's so cheap and he's different than a lot of these Buffalo wide receivers. So, like, I like Coleman. I think that there's pressure on him in Dynasty where he'll really, really fall. But the price is like wide receiver 53. And I'll say, I mean, he'll really, really fall if he doesn't deliver this year in Dynasty. But in redraft and in best ball, like, I'll take tons of shots on Coleman. We talk about building Josh Allen stacks here and building correlation. Coleman is so much cheaper than Shakir this year. And last year they were going like side by side. So, like, I'm with you. I think Coleman, I love seeing you enthusiastic on him.
Yeah, well, Theo, you said earlier that your colleague Scott Barrett is buying Josh Downs in Dynasty, right? The problem is nobody's selling. Keon Coleman is for sale, right? You can go, hey, I'm going to go into this neighborhood and buy a house, but if there's no for sale signs, you can't get anything. Not that people are looking to move Keon Coleman, but you can get into someone's inbox, tell them you need a receiver, and figure out a way where they're suggesting Keon Coleman. He is acquirable. Whereas, again, I love that Scott called out Josh Downs, but like when a lot of podcasters are getting on podcasts saying Josh Downs, it's a way harder to buy. So I think Coleman should be on your number when you're doing dynasty buys, when you're doing redraft values, breakouts. Like, there should be a lot of Coleman. The price is just, there's no cost to finding out. What is he going, like the 7th round of FFPC, I'm assuming?
No, Coleman's going way lower. You can get Coleman somewhere in like the 11th round.
11th? Oh my God. That is just, so that 11th round?
Yeah,
11th round. No, that's not going to last. He'll be an 8th round pick by August.
There you go. Alan Soslowski flag planting Keon Coleman. Alan, let's keep this going. Trey Benson's a guy who has a ton of steam right now. If you just look at some of the news coming out on Trey Benson, all of it is positive. It's a guy who at the beginning of last season was a 3rd round pick, was being drafted side by side with James Conner in early best balls. Of course, that looked to be ridiculous as the season started, and Benson was running behind of Amari DiMercado. But this offseason, it's been sort of a Trey Benson can give us sort of a dual RB1 status, they say. Like, Trey Benson's a guy who's going to be a breakout for us. He's going to help our run game. Arizona extended James Conner 2 seasons. He's going to be 30 years old. But at the end of the day, like, Trey Benson, do we go back to the profile? Another Florida State player that failed to deliver last year, Trey Benson. You're having to pay a pretty significant price tag for him for a true handcuff, but you're still able to get him like in that round 10 range in some of these drafts. I found myself drafting a lot of Trey Benson as like my RB5 on underdog drafts in best ball. Where are you at in your enthusiasm level for him in redraft? Is it a guy that needs a James Conner injury, or is it a guy that can carve out a weekly role as sort of an emergency RB2 emergency flex play for you?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, does he need an injury? Probably, right? Like, I understand taking shots on year 2 running back. So yeah, I think he's somebody you're going to want on your roster. If especially if you believe James Conner has, I mean, he's been pretty Iron Man-ish the last couple of years, but he's had
the last year. But so he played last year. It's sort of, he was a 16 games played, and in 2021 he was 15 games played. But the other seasons around him, where 2023
12.
played 13, 13 in 2022, 13 in 2020, 10 in 2019. So like Connor does miss time every single year but one in his career. I'm sort of in on Benson this year.
Yeah, I like him, but like when we talk about breakouts, like that's the title of this podcast. Is he the type of player that is just going to push James Conner out? Let's say there's no injury. Is he going to play himself ahead to be the alpha role? It's tough for me to see that. Sure, he's the RB2 on a roster, so if the starter gets hurt, we're going to want him. But when we talk about true breakouts, you see Trey Benson getting drafted like where Chase Brown Trey Benson is where Chase Brown is. I don't see that. Last year, Zach Moss started as the starter on Cincinnati, and Chase Brown just took the backfield, right? It was happening. The injury happened, and now there was no looking back. It's hard to see, although I'm not saying no, it's hard to see Benson as I want him, but I don't see him as a true breakout upside guy.
So we've seen JJ McCarthy sort of creep up in drafts. I want to ask you about a quarterback being drafted behind him, and that's Michael Penix Jr., who's being drafted outside of quarterback 2 land. He's right around QB 26, QB 27 in some of these FFPC drafts. All of the other year 2 quarterbacks have people pounding the table for them. You know, we can't even, it's not even worth us talking about Caleb Williams, Drake May, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels. Like, these guys are already established where they're being drafted. They're all being drafted as QB 14 or better. And now JJ McCarthy's starting to creep up in these drafts. But with Penix, he's just sort of being left there. This is a guy who has talent around him. Bijan Robinson, Drake London. Last year, we saw Darnell Mooney have a really big year. I think that the offensive coordinator is sharp over there. I think Zach Robinson, I was wrong on. I was sort of negative on him to start the year. So I have enthusiasm about the Atlanta Falcons offense. Should I also have enthusiasm about Michael Penix Jr.? Because when we're looking for guys who are sleepers and could break through, like, what's the percentage chance Penix is drafted as a QB 26 and finishes as the QB 12?
In some of the ADP I'm looking at, and this almost looked wrong to me, Theo, is Tua going ahead of Michael Penix in a lot of these drafts? I can't even believe it.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Okay. So there it is, right? Like, the only reason you would take Tua in previous years is because he had the 2 elite receivers. We already talked about Waddle, and then, Tyreek is a little bit more of damaged goods. But, man, you set up the Michael Penix thing right. He's the one that could elevate to the next level. I'm not sure. I mean, you have to rank. If you look at all the players ahead of him, I understand why they are. But here is the argument to wait on quarterback, right? Like QB 26, you said, Michael Penix with a good setup and a good offense, and still young, and with Drake London, who's going on the 1-2 turn. Yeah, no, it's so easy to see Penix being a top 15 option. And if you just wait on quarterback, I'm not even sure in most home leagues that Penix is going to get drafted. So what a good call out as a breakout there. I love that one, Theo.
Yeah, Penix is just interesting to me because he's the forgotten man, even though
why though? Why do you think that is?
I think it's a lack of rushing upside for him. And I think with the other guys, we're like with Drake May, it's easy to see it. Bo Nix, easy to see it. Jaden Daniels, obviously.
Tua doesn't have it though. JJ McCarthy doesn't have it.
Among the guys, so McCarthy's athletic. I don't think it's
he gets the Minnesota bump because everyone's like, oh, look what happened with Sam Darnold. That's what's buoying. Like if JJ McCarthy was the quarterback on the Tennessee Titans, he would not be ranked where he is right now.
Yeah, Penix has a huge arm, and I think one of the great arguments for Penix, which seems sort of simplistic, but all of the guys that were around him at Washington failed to deliver last year. The Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, certainly like McDaniel's definitely fired off last year, but when it comes to like the Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, both those guys being drafted inside of round 1 and round 2, not delivering. Did Michael Penix deserve a little more credit for Washington's success?
Was he the elevator? So. Right.
Was he the elevator? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a really good, strong point there. Wasn't there a third wide receiver at Washington with him that's in the NFL? Or do I have that wrong? So it was Polk, there was Rome Odunze, and was there another pass catcher there that we're forgetting that also disappointed possibly?
Oh yeah, I mean from the Bucks, Jalen McMillan.
Oh, McMillan, right? Of course, McMillan.
I said McMillan.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And McMillan was in such a good,
awesome.
Right, but he was in such a good situation, right? Like it took that. Yeah. So no, I love the idea that Penix was the elevator. And look, he got drafted ahead of people were shocked when they just signed Kirk Cousins that year to a mega deal, and they take Penix, and wow. So yeah, you know what? Maybe Penix is like a true break. Like when you talk about like one breakout at each position, I would plant my flag on Penix, man. I really like that you added him to this show. I think that is going to be the victory lap clippable moment for you.
Let's go lightning round here.
Okay.
I think we're both enthusiastic about Penix.
Yeah.
Jatavian Sanders, who last year flashed a little, and Ben Sinnott, who was a huge disappointment. Sinnott was a second-round pick. JT Sanders was the first pick on day 3, was the number 1 pick in the 4th round. Sanders sort of has the tight end room to himself right now with Tommy Tremble banged up in Carolina. We think Carolina's offense is going to take a step forward. Sinnott's sort of chilling. He's a big-time athlete, but again, he's boxed out behind Ertz. Which one of these two, if you're looking for an upside tight end selection, would it be? And are either of these guys worthy of a breakouts discussion?
Yeah, you said lightning round, so I think Sanders is the answer here. Everyone loved him coming out. It was a little disappointing that he got the round 4 draft capital, but Bryce Young looked good enough for me to be optimistic on Sanders, and there's no clear alpha right now I guess Ted McMillan.
Well, Ted McMillan, but I'll say there's no wide receiver 2. Like we could have talked about Xavier Legette, but it's like Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, Adam Thielen. Is this the Tucker Kraft corollary where all of those guys sort of cannibalize each other for wide receiver 2?
And Ted hasn't done anything yet. I mean, still, he's got to be assumed that he's not going to more than he's going to as a rookie, right? Like, I know we could have optimism he's being drafted as such, but Sanders, like you said, it's even if he's the second most targeted player, that's a true breakout right there. I like that. And Sinnott, I'm no good on Sinnott because of the blocking.
Sinnott feels like Luke Schoonmaker, like a guy like I was way too enthusiastic. And I'll take an L. A lot of people will love to point out my enthusiasm for Sinnott last year in rookie drafts. Yeah, I took Sinnott. I think that I'll take the L on that one. I think it's Schoonmaker all over again. He's a big move tight end. He's probably going to make a ton of money in the NFL as an athletic, like number 2 tight end, but he's not going to be a guy that elevates fantasy football teams. Sanders is interesting though. And then there's also this steam with Jimmy Horn. A 6th round pick they took this year. So like they have all these wide receivers they like in Carolina. Ted McMillan's going to be the leading target earner. There's a chance JT Sanders is a sneaky number 2 target this year. I think he's a really good pick. Last player to talk on, we talked about Trey Benson. Are you in or out on Marshawn Lloyd this year? A guy who was a 3rd round pick last year. Alan, I know that we talked about him from when we were doing a lot of Dynasty podcasts together. We certainly talked about Lloyd last year as a upside handcuff, a guy where if Josh Jacobs goes down, Lloyd is going to be a guy who affects leagues. Now you're able to get Marshawn Lloyd somewhere in the end of round 13 and round 14. I think he's a really fun handcuff. There's others who point out and say not so fast. Emmanuel Wilson's still there. Lloyd might be a wasted pick. Where do you fall in the Marshawn Lloyd? Is he an upside handcuff? Because I'll say if we can give him the handcuff job, then I think that the argument is still there. Josh Jacobs takes on so much volume that Jacobs could potentially go down this year. Like Jacobs, again, like he's 27, but he's taken so much volume throughout his career that he's almost like an older 27-year-old. I know it sounds like a stupid thing to say,
but got a lot of miles, a lot of carries.
Got a lot of tread on the tires.
Yeah, I
as
mean,
the old timers like to say.
I have a 2016 car that has 60,000 miles on it. I know people that have 2020 cars that have 260,000 miles on it. So it doesn't matter how old you are. It's not the years, it's the miles, right? Like
that's right.
That's what it is. I also, it's very, I know that we consider Green Bay a running team, but now look what they did. They added 2 receivers if you count Jameson Williams as a pass catcher receiver. Maybe they're saying like we need to pass more because that didn't really work last year. So, and it's also if Jacobs misses a game, it's easy to see both guys, Emmanuel Wilson and Marshawn Lloyd sharing. So people are dropping Emmanuel Wilson in the Dynasty League. So I've been picking him up for $1. That's the bet I'm doing. It's very difficult when these guys like just miss all this time and then miss a whole year like Marshawn Lloyd does. Like, I don't think there's many cases of them coming back and being a fantasy football dominant, especially right away. I'm sure there's a couple examples. So Lloyd is not a player that in the 60 drafts I've even thought about once, but I'm open to being wrong there too. I like that we had the discussion.
Yeah, I can't quit Marshawn Lloyd. I think I might be really chasing a dream there, but when I see him available, like sometimes in the 15th round, I can't help it. I will bet on him beating out Emmanuel Wilson and winning the number 2 job there. He was such a good player. And such a strong Senior Bowl. People were sort of head over heels of that Senior Bowl performance. So I'm in there. This was a lot of fun, Alan. I know I kept you about 15 minutes longer than we had discussed, but the conversation is so money.
It's not the 15 minutes you kept me extra. It's the 10 minutes late you were for your own podcast. That is unacceptable.
Well, let's we can talk about this. I will back myself up. I went in the DMs and I saw that there was a StreamYard link, and I was waiting on Alan to jump in the room, and then I realized that I didn't send the new one. It was an old StreamYard link.
Okay,
so
all right.
Listen, you've heard this before. Into the mind. We're getting into the process here, Alan. How the sausage is made.
I'm going to use a dirty word. I hope you don't get, but they say excuses are like assholes, and everyone has them, and most of them stink.
Well, there you go, Alan. Let everyone know once again where they can find your work. I'm going to be on Alan's show over on the RotoWire YouTube. Make sure you check that out. Let everybody know what you have going on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to promote. I was going to promote your appearance on the RotoWire Dynasty Fantasy Football Show. That is what's for next Friday's date. So today it'll be the 27th.
27th, yep.
Right. So June 27th, we do it live on the RotoWire YouTube page. But if you can't watch us at 10:30 in the morning Eastern time sharp, Theo, there's no being late to my podcast.
No.
We just lock the door if you're late. And then that'll be on the audio podcast feed and, of course, on the YouTube page. So that is the only thing I want to promote, other than if you want to check out any RotoWire premium stuff, YouTube 15 is 15% off any subscription.
Check out my backfield breakdown article over at Fantasy Points. It's free. Check out Jared Smola on School of Scott this week with Scott Barrett and I.
I like Jared. Jared's
love Jared. Jared's awesome.
So he's going to be on. So it's you, Scott, and Jared on that podcast.
That was one where it was mostly Scott and Jared because I had an issue. It's been a weird week for me, Alan, over here.
Yeah,
I'll say Davis Maddock came on this podcast. Highly recommend that. We talked about the zero RB strategy this year. That was a great episode. And then we have a bunch of episodes lined up. July is going to be a massive month for us here at Fantasy Points. Fantasy Points articles, Fantasy Points podcasts. Make sure you subscribe to Fantasy Points YouTube too.
Who is if you could have any guest in the world on your podcast here, like it didn't matter how big they are, athlete, media person, or just a fantasy person, who would be someone that you haven't had on this podcast yet that you would like on at some point?
Well, you said haven't had on, so I was going to end the show with like a cold close. I was going to say it would be Alan Soslowski.
No, give me a
but then you add the haven't had on. That's an interesting one. I'll say, like, for all the fantasy football people that I've podcasted with over the years, I never podcasted with Evan Silva. I think he would be interesting to podcast with.
Yep.
That would be sort of one, but I don't know. I'm living the dream here, Alan.
Yeah,
I'm talking with guys like you, and we're getting it done here. So I can't really think of one.
No, you said Evan's a good one because you and I have been playing fantasy football for a long time. And, whereas a lot of people consider like the Matthew Berrys of the world, like the OGs, the GOATs, and he is like, he started this thing. Evan is like pretty close to like one of those founding fathers. Like he's almost like the connection between like the really old school guys like Berry and like the new form of media. Evan really is that transition guy because obviously he was doing this type of stuff when nobody else was, and he's withstood the test of time. So as he's still one of the best.
Yeah, no, 100%. But we're lining up some really cool. I have some cool new guests coming on in July. A lot of cool articles coming out. Make sure you check out Ryan Heath's recent article.
Who was your worst podcast guest ever? Worst that you've had on the show? I'm only kidding. I know you won't answer that.
No, I would never answer that, but I'll tell you off air. It's from years ago. So anyway, stick with us here at Fantasy Points. We're going to help you crush your fantasy football leagues this season. Make sure you check out everything Alan's doing over at RotoWire, and we'll see you soon.